Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not a drill, not a simulation, and not the kind of geopolitical speculation that gets walked back by morning. At 0300 hours Zulu time, the largest coordinated drone assault in military history achieved what no adversary has accomplished since Pearl Harbor. 2,500 unmanned aerial systems launched in synchronized waves from positions across Iran, Iraq, and Syria have just executed a precision strike that has permanently altered the balance of military power in the Middle East. The target was Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest American forward operating location in the Central Command Area of Responsibility, home to more than 11,000 American personnel, and the primary hub for all United States Air Force operations across the entire Middle Eastern theater. The number that Pentagon planners are processing right now, the number that has triggered emergency sessions in the White House Situation Room, the number that represents the single most catastrophic loss of American air power since the Second World War is this: 200 F-35A Lightning II fifth-generation stealth multi-role fighters destroyed on the ground in the span of 47 minutes. Not damaged, not temporarily grounded, completely destroyed. Vaporized jet fuel, collapsed hardened aircraft shelters, titanium airframes reduced to twisted wreckage, radiating heat signatures visible from orbital surveillance platforms 300 kilometers above the Arabian Peninsula. The dollar value of this loss exceeds $18 billion in replacement cost alone, but the strategic value is incalculable because those aircraft represented the entire forward-deployed stealth strike capability that the United States maintained for operations against Iran, for potential intervention in the Strait of Hormuz, for deterrence missions across the Gulf, and for rapid response to any escalation involving American interests from the Levant to the Arabian Sea. This is the most catastrophic single strategic event in the history of modern American air power, an event so consequential, so irreversible, and so devastating in its implications that every allied government from Tel Aviv to Tokyo is currently in emergency consultation, trying to understand what American security guarantees are worth when the most advanced air force ever assembled can be neutralized in less than 1 hour by technology that costs a fraction of the assets it just destroyed. The cost exchange ratio that Iran has just demonstrated is beyond anything defense planners considered possible. Each Shahed 136 drone costs approximately $20,000 to manufacture. Each Mohajer 10 reconnaissance and strike platform costs roughly $200,000. The entire assault package that Iran deployed represents a total investment of approximately $70 million. That $70 million investment just eliminated $18 billion of American combat power, creating a cost exchange ratio of more than 250 to 1. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the noise of official narratives and mainstream defense commentary, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this attack. The technical specifications of the drone systems that penetrated the most heavily defended American installation in the Middle East. The operational failures that allowed this catastrophic outcome. The strategic paralysis now gripping Washington as planners confront the reality that forward basing in the era of mass drone warfare is a liability rather than an advantage. The regional realignment already underway as allies reassess whether American protection is worth the targets it paints on their territory. And the global implications as every adversary from Moscow to Pyongyang absorbs the lesson that asymmetric warfare has just achieved what conventional military competition could not. The attack began at 0245 Zulu when the first wave of 300 Shahed 136 one-way attack drones crossed into Iraqi airspace from Iranian launch sites in Kermanshah province. These are not sophisticated platforms. They are essentially flying bombs, propeller-driven systems with 80-kilogram high-explosive warheads, terminal guidance provided by basic satellite navigation with backup inertial systems. Maximum speed of 185 kilometers per hour, operational range of 2,000 kilometers. Radar cross-section so minimal that conventional air search radars struggle to distinguish them from birds or weather phenomena. Unit cost so low that Iran manufactures them in quantities that make individual intercept attempts economically absurd. The Shahed 136 has proven itself across multiple theaters. Russia has employed thousands of these systems in Ukraine, where they have repeatedly penetrated sophisticated air defense networks to strike power infrastructure, command facilities, and logistics nodes hundreds of kilometers behind front lines. The The Ukrainian experience demonstrated that even advanced Western air defense systems, including NASAMS and IRIS-T, struggle to maintain intercept rates above 70% against mass drone swarms, and that 70% intercept rate only holds when Defender has ammunition stockpiles sufficient to engage every target and when systems are optimally positioned with overlapping coverage. Al-Udeid had neither optimal positioning nor sufficient ammunition depth. The base air defense architecture consisted of 6 Avenger short-range air defense systems, 4 counter-rocket, artillery, and mortar systems designated CRAM, and 2 Patriot batteries positioned to provide point defense of critical facilities. This defensive array was designed and optimized for threats from the previous era. Ballistic missiles following predictable trajectories, manned aircraft operating at high altitude, cruise missiles approaching at high speed along easily modeled flight paths. The defensive network was never structured to handle saturation attacks from slow-moving, low-altitude platforms approaching simultaneously from multiple azimuths, with launch sequences deliberately staggered to create continuous engagement demands that exceed reload cycle times. The first wave of 300 drones approached from the northwest at altitudes between 50 and 100 meters above ground level, using terrain masking where available and relying on small radar cross-section everywhere else. The CRAM systems acquired tracks at ranges between 8 and 12 kilometers, well within their engagement envelopes, and began defensive fire using 20mm cannon systems. The initial intercept rate was excellent, approaching 85% as the automated systems tracked and engaged targets with minimal human intervention required. But each CRAM magazine contains only 1,500 rounds of ammunition. At cyclic fire rates of 4,500 rounds per minute, each system can sustain engagement for approximately 20 seconds before requiring reload. The reload cycle requires 6 minutes with trained crews operating under combat conditions. Iran's attack planners understood these constraints perfectly. The first wave was not intended to penetrate defenses. It was intended to deplete ammunition and reveal defensive positioning for the waves that followed. As CRAM systems cycled through their magazines and entered reload status, the second wave of 500 drones appeared on approach vectors offset 30 degrees from the initial attack axis. The Avenger systems engaged using Stinger missiles, achieving intercept rates near 90%, but each launcher carries only 8 missiles and reload requires physical replacement of launch pods, a process requiring 12 minutes per launcher, even with experienced crews working at maximum speed. The Patriot batteries held fire during the initial waves, preserving their limited missile inventory for higher-value threats that never materialized, because there were no higher-value threats. The entire attack package consisted of low-cost drones, and by the time defensive commanders understood that these drones were the entire attack rather than a preliminary screening action, the defensive network had already been rendered combat ineffective through ammunition depletion. Wave 3 arrived with 700 platforms as the defensive systems remained in reload status. These drones encountered essentially undefended airspace and proceeded directly to their assigned target coordinates, which satellite reconnaissance and signals intelligence had identified with precision. The primary targets were the hardened aircraft shelters housing the F-35 fleet, rectangular reinforced concrete structures designed to protect aircraft from blast overpressure and fragmentation during missile or rocket attacks. The shelters were not designed to survive direct hits from 80-kilogram warheads delivered with precision against specific aim points. Each shelter received between 4 and 7 impacts in sequences spaced across 90-second intervals. The first impact typically breached the roof structure. Subsequent impacts penetrated into the interior space where jet fuel, munitions, and the aircraft itself created secondary explosions that generated internal overpressures exceeding the structural capacity of the shelter walls. The result was catastrophic structural failure that buried the aircraft under thousands of tons of collapsed concrete while simultaneously exposing it to fires fed by tens of thousands of liters of jet fuel. The fourth wave of 600 drones targeted fuel storage infrastructure, ammunition bunkers, and runway surfaces. The fuel farm at Al-Udeid stores approximately 400 million liters of JP-8 jet fuel in above-ground storage tanks, each tank holding between 8 and 12 million liters. Precisely targeted strikes against tank connection points and pumping facilities created cascading failures across the fuel distribution network. Multiple tanks suffered catastrophic structural failure, releasing fuel that ignited and created fireballs visible from Doha, 40 kilometers to the northeast. The ammunition storage areas received similar treatment with results that defense officials are still assessing. Modern precision-guided munitions stored in quantity create secondary explosion hazards that compound the damage from initial strikes. When hardened bunkers containing AGM-158 JSM cruise missiles, GBU-39 small-diameter bombs, and AM-120 AMRAAM air-to-air missiles suffer direct penetrating hits, the resulting sympathetic detonations destroy not only the munitions themselves but also create fragmentation and blast effects that propagate to adjacent storage facilities. The fifth and final wave of 400 drones arrived as base personnel were still responding to fires and structural collapses from previous waves. This final wave targeted command and control facilities, radar installations, and any remaining aircraft that had been positioned outside hardened shelters. The base air traffic control tower suffered multiple direct hits that killed everyone inside and rendered the facility structurally unsound. The primary radar system for air defense coordination was destroyed. Backup power generation facilities were disabled. Communications arrays were reduced to wreckage. At 03:47 minutes after the first drone crossed into Iraqi airspace, the last impacts were recorded. The base remained physically intact in the sense that most structures were still standing, and the majority of personnel had survived by sheltering in hardened facilities. But as a functioning military installation capable of supporting combat operations, Al Udeid Air Base had been rendered completely non-operational. 200 F-35A fighters destroyed, fuel storage reduced to burning wreckage, ammunition stocks either destroyed or inaccessible due to structural damage and ongoing fires, runways cratered in multiple locations, command facilities disabled, air defense network depleted and degraded. The Pentagon response in the hours since this attack reveals the depth of strategic paralysis now gripping American military leadership. There has been no immediate retaliation. No strike packages launched against Iranian territory. No movement of carrier strike groups toward offensive positions. Instead, there has been silence broken only by vague statements about assessing the situation and consulting with allies. This silence is not restraint. It is paralysis born from the recognition that every response option carries unacceptable costs. What does retaliation look like when the adversary has just demonstrated the capability to destroy forward-deployed American air power with technology so cheap and so numerous that conventional deterrence models are rendered meaningless? Strike Iranian drone production facilities? Iran operates dozens of manufacturing sites distributed across its territory, many of them underground or hardened against air attack. Some of them are co-located with civilian industrial facilities, creating collateral damage concerns that would hand Iran an information warfare victory regardless of military effects. And even if strikes successfully destroyed every identified production facility, Iran has already manufactured thousands of these systems and distributed them to proxy forces across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. Strike Iranian command and control networks. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force operates with decentralized command architecture specifically designed to maintain operational capability even after leadership decapitation attempts. Regional commanders have pre-delegated authority to conduct operations without requiring approval from Tehran. Destroying the central command structure would degrade coordination but would not prevent continued attacks. Strike Iranian military installations. With what assets and from what bases? The F-35 fleet that would normally execute such missions no longer exists in theater. The closest replacement aircraft are based in the continental United States and would require multiple aerial refuelings to reach targets in Iran, creating complex operational dependencies and extended exposure windows for defensive systems to engage them. The carrier air wings in the region consist primarily of FA-18 Super Hornets, fourth-generation platforms that lack the stealth characteristics necessary to survive in contested airspace against modern integrated air defense systems. If you want analysis this sharp, this deep, this willing to challenge official narratives, subscribe now to ensure you never miss an update. The consequences of this attack extend far beyond the immediate military losses. Every calculation that has underpinned American force posture in the Middle East for the past 30 years has just been invalidated. The forward basing model that positioned American combat power close to potential conflict zones was built on assumptions that no longer hold. The assumption that American air bases would be sanctuary zones protected by overwhelming defensive capabilities. The assumption that adversaries lacked the technical capacity or operational sophistication to threaten these installations. The assumption that the cost of attacking American bases would exceed any rational benefit an adversary might gain. All of these assumptions died tonight in the skies over Qatar. Forward bases are no longer force multipliers. They are liabilities. Concentrated targets that present adversaries with opportunities to inflict catastrophic losses using relatively cheap weapons. Every American airbase from Al Dhafra in the United Arab Emirates to Incirlik in Turkey to Soda Bay in Greece is now understood by adversaries to be vulnerable to the same tactics that just devastated Al Udeid. Dispersal is not a solution because dispersed forces sacrifice the concentration that generates combat power. Hardening is not a solution because hardening that can survive saturation attack from thousands of precision-guided weapons would cost more than the assets being protected. The broader strategic implications cascade outward from this central revelation. Israel is watching this attack with particular horror because Israeli air defense networks face exactly the same challenge on a more compressed timeline. Hezbollah possesses approximately 150,000 rockets and missiles, the majority of which are unguided systems, but increasingly significant numbers of which are precision-guided platforms capable of targeting specific structures. Iran has demonstrated the operational model for overwhelming even sophisticated air defenses through mass and coordination. The lesson will not be lost on Lebanese Hezbollah or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Houthi forces in Yemen. Saudi Arabia is reassessing whether hosting American military facilities provides security or creates targets. The logic that made American presence desirable was that it would deter Iranian aggression by demonstrating American commitment to regional security. But if American bases can be devastated in less than 1 hour, then hosting those bases simply ensures that Saudi territory becomes the battlefield when conflict erupts. The strategic calculation is shifting rapidly from seeking American protection to seeking Iranian accommodation. The United Arab Emirates faces identical calculations with added complexity from economic dependencies on trade relationships that could be severed by any party in a regional conflict. Emirati leadership has spent the past 18 months quietly reducing military cooperation with the United States and expanding economic engagement with both Iran and China. Tonight's attack will accelerate that trend decisively. Turkey is observing with satisfaction tinged with concern. Satisfaction because anything that degrades American military power in the Middle East creates opportunities for Turkish influence expansion. Concern because the same drone technologies that devastated Al Udeid could be employed against Turkish positions in Syria or Libya or anywhere else Ankara has committed forces beyond its borders. The era when military power was measured primarily in tanks, aircraft, and ships is ending. The new era measures power in production capacity for cheap autonomous systems and in operational sophistication to employ them at scale. Russia is absorbing lessons about how to apply similar tactics against NATO logistics nodes and air bases in Poland and the Baltic states. The fundamental problem is identical. Concentrated high-value assets protected by air defense networks that are optimized against different threat profiles and that lack sufficient ammunition depth to survive saturation attacks. Russian defense industry is already producing Geran 2 drones, which are reverse-engineered copies of Iranian Shahed 136 systems, in quantities that number in the thousands per month. The prospect of similar attacks against Ramstein Air Base in Germany or Lask Air Base in Poland is no longer theoretical speculation. It is an operational possibility that NATO planners must now incorporate into every defensive calculation. China is evaluating how these tactics translate to the Pacific theater and specifically to the problem of neutralizing American air power concentrated at Andersen Air Force Base in Guam and Kadena Air Base in Okinawa. Chinese defense industry possesses production capacity that exceeds Iranian capabilities by orders of magnitude. If Iran can manufacture 2,000 drones for a single operation, China could manufacture 20,000. The distances involved in the Pacific create different operational challenges, but the fundamental vulnerability is identical. American combat power in the Western Pacific is concentrated at a small number of installations that present lucrative targets for mass drone attacks that could be launched from the Chinese mainland, from artificial islands in the South China Sea, or from surface vessels operating in international waters. The global security architecture built on American military primacy is collapsing not through direct confrontation between great powers, but through asymmetric erosion that renders conventional military advantages meaningless. The United States spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined, but that spending is optimized for the wrong threats. Exquisite platforms designed to dominate in traditional warfare scenarios. Air defense systems calibrated to intercept sophisticated threats while struggling against cheap autonomous systems. Force structures built around forward presence that concentrates targets rather than dispersing them. The question that every American ally is asking right now is whether American security guarantees retain credibility when American forces can be devastated by adversaries employing technology that costs less than the fuel required to fly American aircraft to the fight. Extended deterrence collapses when the deterring power cannot protect its own forward deployed forces. Alliance commitments lose meaning when treaty obligations cannot be backed by credible military capacity to intervene. The economic dimensions of tonight's attack are equally devastating for American strategic position. $18 billion in destroyed aircraft represents not just financial cost, but also production capacity that cannot be quickly replaced. Lockheed Martin manufactures approximately 150 F-35s per year across all variants for all customers. American losses tonight equal more than 1 full year of production dedicated entirely to replacing destroyed aircraft. But production slots for the next 5 years are already allocated to existing orders from the United States Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps, plus international customers including Japan, Australia, South Korea, and multiple European nations. Replacement of tonight's losses would require either breaking commitments to allied nations or accepting that the destroyed capability will not be restored until the late 2030s. Iran spent $70 million to eliminate capability that will cost $18 billion to replace and that cannot actually be replaced for more than a decade, even if funding is unlimited. This cost exchange calculus fundamentally undermines the economic sustainability of American military primacy. The United States cannot afford to lose $18 billion of combat power every few months. Iran can afford to spend $70 million every few months indefinitely. The mathematics of this competition doom the defender to eventual exhaustion, regardless of starting resource advantages. Subscribe to this channel because in a world this dangerous, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is necessary. Has this night permanently altered the Middle Eastern power balance, or will Washington find a way to reassert dominance? Your engagement keeps this work independent and sharp. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding what is actually happening. Tonight represents the end of an era and the beginning of another. The era when American military power could be projected globally through networks of forward bases protected by technological superiority has ended. The new era belongs to adversaries who understand that cheap autonomous systems employed at scale defeat expensive platforms concentrated at vulnerable locations. The transition will be studied for generations as the moment when the nature of military power fundamentally changed, when the metrics that had defined strategic capability since the Second World War lost relevance, when the unipolar moment built on American hegemony collapsed not through direct confrontation, but through asymmetric erosion that rendered conventional advantages meaningless. 2,500 drones have just rewritten the rules of power projection, forward presence, and deterrence credibility. 200 destroyed F-35s have just demonstrated that the future of warfare belongs not to those with the most sophisticated individual platforms, but to those who can produce, deploy, and coordinate the largest numbers of cheap autonomous systems. And 47 minutes of sustained attack have just proven that concentrated forward basing in the age of mass drone warfare is not strength, but catastrophic vulnerability waiting to be exploited. The world will never be the same. The balance has shifted. And the old order is not coming back. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop asking the questions that matter.